Marcus Thompson had always been different from the other boys in his small village of Millbrook. While they spent their afternoons playing football or chasing girls, he could be found in the quiet corners of his grandfather's workshop, methodically cleaning and maintaining the old hunting rifles that hung on the wooden walls. His hands, though small and seemingly delicate, moved with a precision that belied his 16 years. The other teenagers in town saw him as an oddity. Marcus was shorter than most, with thick glasses that made his eyes appear unnaturally large, and a quiet demeanor that some mistook for weakness. When he walked through the village square, whispers followed him like shadows. "There goes the strange Thompson boy," they would say, "always with his nose in those dusty gun magazines, never talking to anyone normal." His father, Robert Thompson, was a respected carpenter in the community, but even he struggled to understand his son's peculiar fascination with firearms. "Why don't you come help me with the Johnsons' kitchen renovation instead of spending all day with those old guns?" Robert would ask, genuine concern creasing his weathered face. But Marcus would simply shake his head, returning his attention to whatever rifle mechanism he was studying. The ridicule reached its peak during his final year of secondary school. During a career guidance session, when each student was asked to share their future aspirations, Marcus stood up with quiet confidence and announced, "I want to join the Royal Guard and serve my country as a marksman." The classroom erupted in laughter so loud that Mrs. Henderson, the career counselor, had to bang her ruler on the desk 3 times to restore order. "Marcus, dear," Mrs. Henderson said with barely concealed condescension, "perhaps you should consider something more suitable to your abilities. The military requires physical strength and mental toughness. Maybe accounting or library sciences would be better options for someone of your disposition." The laughter continued as Marcus sat down, his face burning with embarrassment, but his resolve unshaken. Even his best friend David looked at him with pity rather than support. "Come on, mate," David whispered. "You know they're right. Look at yourself. You can barely see without those thick glasses, and you've never even been in a proper fight. The military would eat you alive." That evening, Marcus walked home through the village streets, the echoes of laughter still ringing in his ears. Mrs. Peterson from the bakery shook her head sympathetically as he passed. "Poor boy," she murmured to her assistant, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Living in a fantasy world, someone should talk sense into him before he embarrasses himself further. But Marcus had learned something important about himself over the years spent in his grandfather's workshop. He had discovered that when he held a rifle, when he looked down the sight and aligned his target, something extraordinary happened. The world around him would fade into complete silence. His breathing would slow to an almost meditative rhythm, and his hands would become perfectly steady. In those moments, he wasn't the awkward, ridiculed boy from Millbrook. He was someone else entirely. His grandfather, old William Thompson, was the only person who had ever witnessed this transformation. A veteran of 2 wars, William recognized something in his grandson that others couldn't see. "Boy's got the gift," he would tell his wife, Margaret, after their shooting sessions in the woods behind their cottage. "Never seen anything like it. That rifle becomes part of him, like it's just an extension of his own body." But William had passed away the previous winter, taking with him the only validation Marcus had ever received. Now, facing a future where everyone expected him to abandon his dreams and settle for something more realistic, Marcus felt more alone than ever. The rejection from his peers, the disappointment from his parents, and the skepticism from every adult in his life created a weight that pressed down on his shoulders with each passing day. The final straw came during the annual Millbrook Summer Festival. The local police department had set up a carnival shooting gallery as part of their community outreach program. Sergeant Mills, a burly man with a booming voice, was encouraging festival-goers to try their luck at hitting small targets with air rifles. "Step right up," he called out. "Test your marksmanship skills. Winners get a special police department pin." When Marcus approached the booth, Sergeant Mills looked him up and down with obvious skepticism. "You sure about this, son? These rifles have quite a kick to them." The growing crowd of onlookers began to snicker, recognizing the boy who claimed he wanted to join the Royal Guard. "I'd like to try, sir," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. Sergeant Mills shrugged and handed him the air rifle, explaining the rules while the crowd gathered closer, expecting entertainment. "You get 5 shots at those 5 targets down there. Each one's about the size of a coin, and they're 40 feet away. Most folks are lucky to hit 2 out of 5. Marcus took the rifle and felt that familiar transformation begin. The noise of the crowd faded, his breathing slowed, and his vision seemed to sharpen despite his thick glasses. He raised the rifle, aligned the sight with the first target, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure his grandfather had taught him. The metallic ping of the first target falling was followed by complete silence from the crowd. Marcus moved to the second target, then the third, fourth, and fifth. Each shot was fired with the same deliberate precision. Each target fell with the same satisfying ping. When he lowered the rifle and turned back to the crowd, their faces had changed from amusement to stunned disbelief. Sergeant Mills stared at the fallen targets, then at Marcus, then back at the targets. I've never seen anything like that," he stammered. 5 perfect shots. That's professional-level marksmanship." But the moment of triumph was short-lived. As Marcus walked away from the booth, he heard the whispers starting again. "Just a lucky streak," someone said. "Probably rigged somehow," suggested another. "Still doesn't change the fact that he's not military material." That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, clutching the police department pin Sergeant Mills had given him. The brief moment of validation felt hollow in the face of continued skepticism. He knew that one demonstration at a carnival booth wouldn't change anyone's mind about his capabilities or his future. The applications for military service were due in 3 weeks, and Marcus had already filled out all the paperwork. Despite every voice telling him to reconsider, despite every laugh and dismissive comment, something deep inside him refused to give up. His grandfather's voice seemed to echo in his memory. "Sometimes, boy, the world needs to see what you're really made of before it'll take you seriously." As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus made a decision that would change the trajectory of his entire life. He would submit his application to the Royal Guard regardless of what anyone thought. He would face whatever challenges lay ahead, no matter how many people expected him to fail. Because deep down, beneath all the doubt and ridicule, he knew something that no one else could see. He was exactly where he was meant to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The world just hadn't figured it out yet. The letter arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in March, bearing the official seal of the Royal Guard Selection Committee. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he tore open the envelope, his parents watching anxiously from across the kitchen table. The formal language was difficult to decipher at first, but one phrase stood out clearly. "You have been accepted for basic training." His mother, Sarah, gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. His father set down his coffee cup with such force that it rattled against the saucer. "Well, I'll be damned," Robert muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. They actually accepted him. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire. At the local pub, men who had served in various branches of the military shook their heads in bewilderment. "Poor lad doesn't know what he's gotten himself into," said Tom Bradley, a former Army sergeant. "Royal Guard training isn't like the regular military, it's brutal. They'll break him in the first week." Mrs. Henderson, the career counselor, was particularly vocal about her concerns. "I've seen this before," she told anyone who would listen. "Young people get caught up in romantic notions about military service, but the reality is much harsher. That boy is setting himself up for a devastating failure." Marcus tried to ignore the whispers and predictions of his inevitable downfall, but they followed him everywhere. Even at the farewell gathering his parents organized, the atmosphere was more like a funeral than a celebration. People offered condolences rather than congratulations, and more than one person pulled his parents aside to express their sympathy for what they saw as an upcoming family tragedy. The journey to the Royal Guard training facility took Marcus far from everything familiar. As the train carried him across the countryside toward the imposing fortress that would be his home for the next 6 months, he clutched his grandfather's compass in his pocket and tried to steady his nerves. His arrival at the facility was everything he had feared and worse. The other recruits were immediately identifiable as soldiers in training, tall, muscular, confident young men who looked like they had been preparing for military service their entire lives. Marcus, with his slight frame, thick glasses, and nervous demeanor, stood out like a scholar at a boxing match. Drill Sergeant Harrison, a mountain of a man with scars crisscrossing his weathered face and a voice that could shatter windows, took one look at Marcus and shook his head in disgust. "What in the blazes is this?" he roared, circling around Marcus like a predator sizing up wounded prey. "Did someone send me a librarian by mistake?" The other recruits snickered, and Marcus felt his face burn with familiar embarrassment. But before he could respond, Sergeant Harrison continued his verbal assault. "Thompson, is it? Let me guess. Mummy and Daddy thought military service would make a man out of their precious little boy. Well, son, this isn't summer camp. This is the Royal Guard, and we don't have time to babysit weaklings who should have stayed home with their picture books." The first week of training was a nightmare that seemed to confirm everyone's worst predictions. The physical demands were beyond anything Marcus had ever experienced. 5-mile runs at dawn left him gasping and stumbling, while his fellow recruits barely seemed winded. The obstacle courses, designed to test strength, agility, and endurance, proved nearly impossible for his small frame to navigate. During one particularly challenging rope-climbing exercise, Marcus struggled for nearly 10 minutes to reach the halfway point, while other recruits completed the course in under 2 minutes. As he finally slid down in exhaustion, his hands raw and bleeding, he heard Recruit Johnson, a former football player, whisper loudly to his friend, "How long before Four Eyes washes out? I give him another week, Max." The combat training sessions were even more humiliating. When paired against other recruits for hand-to-hand combat exercises, Marcus found himself repeatedly thrown to the ground, pinned, and defeated within seconds. His glasses were knocked off so many times that he began to fear they would break completely, leaving him effectively blind. Drill Sergeant Harrison seemed to take particular pleasure in Marcus's struggles. "Thompson!" he would bellow during formation. "Show the other recruits how not to hold a rifle. Demonstrate for us the proper technique for missing a target." The laughter that followed these comments was like salt in an open wound. The meals in the mess hall became exercises in social isolation. Marcus would sit alone at the far end of a table while groups of recruits bonded over shared stories of athletic achievements and teenage conquests. Conversations would die when he approached, and he often caught groups of his fellow trainees looking in his direction and shaking their heads sympathetically. "Poor guy," he heard Recruit Martinez say one evening. "He seems nice enough, but he's just not cut out for this life. Someone should probably have a word with him before this gets any worse." The breaking point came during the 3rd week of training, during a particularly grueling field exercise. The recruits were required to navigate a challenging terrain course while carrying full combat gear, including weapons and ammunition. The course was designed to test not just physical endurance, but also tactical thinking and the ability to maintain composure under pressure. Marcus had fallen behind the group within the first mile. His smaller stature made the heavy pack feel like it weighed twice as much as it did for the other recruits, and his glasses kept fogging up from exertion, making navigation difficult. By the time he reached the halfway checkpoint, the rest of his unit was already completing the final phase of the exercise. Sergeant Harrison was waiting for him with arms crossed and the expression of complete disgust. "Thompson, you worthless excuse for a recruit, you're holding up the entire unit. Your fellow soldiers are waiting on you, which means in a real combat situation, you'd be responsible for getting them killed." The words hit Marcus harder than any physical blow. He had always prided himself on being someone others could depend on, and the thought that he might actually endanger the lives of fellow soldiers was devastating. As he struggled to catch his breath and continue the exercise, doubt began to creep into his mind for the first time since arriving at the facility. That night, as he lay in his narrow bunk listening to the snores of his fellow recruits, Marcus seriously considered calling his parents and asking them to come pick him up. The phone call would be humiliating, but not as humiliating as being officially dismissed from the program. At least if he left voluntarily, he could maintain some shred of dignity. He thought about Mrs. Henderson's words, about all the people in Millbrook who had predicted this exact outcome. Maybe they had been right. Maybe he had been living in a fantasy, believing he could succeed in a world where he so clearly didn't belong. But then he remembered something his grandfather had told him during one of their last conversations before the old man's death. "Marcus, boy, there's going to come a time when everything seems impossible, when everyone around you believes you should quit. That's when you'll discover what you're really made of. The question isn't whether you have what it takes to succeed. The question is whether you have what it takes to keep going when success seems impossible." The next morning brought another day of grueling physical training, more humiliation, and more whispered conversations about when the Thompson boy would finally accept reality and go home. But something had changed in Marcus during that long, dark night of the soul. The doubt was still there, but it was accompanied by something else, a stubborn determination that ran deeper than his fear of failure. As he struggled through another day of exercises that left him exhausted and demoralized, Marcus held on to one thought. He hadn't been brought here to quit. He had been brought here to prove something, not just to others, but to himself. And until he had that opportunity, until he could show what he was truly capable of, he would endure whatever challenges lay ahead. The other recruits might see a weakling who didn't belong. The drill sergeants might see a liability who would endanger his unit, but somewhere deep inside, Marcus still carried the memory of those 5 perfect shots at the Millbrook Summer Festival and the look of amazement on Sergeant Mills's face. He wasn't ready to give up on that memory. Not yet. The 5th week of training began with an announcement that sent ripples of excitement through the barracks. Captain Reynolds, the commanding officer of the training facility, stood before the assembled recruits with an expression that commanded absolute attention. His weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen combat, and his presence filled the room with an almost electric tension. "Gentlemen," Captain Reynolds began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service, "you have now completed the basic physical conditioning phase of your training. Today marks the beginning of specialized weapons training. And I want to make something crystal clear from the outset." He paused, allowing his gaze to sweep across the rows of eager young faces. "The Royal Guard is not just about physical strength or endurance. While those qualities are important, what truly distinguishes a Royal Guard member from an ordinary soldier is precision, discipline, and an almost supernatural ability to protect those under our care. Some of you will excel in close combat. Others will master tactical planning. And a few of you will discover that you possess a gift that cannot be taught or learned through repetition." Marcus felt his heart rate increase as Captain Reynolds continued. "Today you will be introduced to the marksmanship range. This is where we separate those who can hold a rifle from those who can truly master one." The walk to the shooting range felt longer than any physical exercise Marcus had endured during his time at the facility. Around him, his fellow recruits chatted excitedly about their previous shooting experiences. Recruit Johnson boasted about hunting expeditions with his father. Martinez talked about his high school shooting club achievements. Even the quieter members of the unit seemed confident about this new phase of their training. Marcus walked in silence, his grandfather's compass pressing against his palm in his pocket. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he felt something other than dread about a training exercise. This was his element, the place where all those hours in his grandfather's workshop might finally prove their worth. The shooting range was an impressive facility, with multiple lanes stretching out to targets positioned at various distances. The smell of gun oil and the distant echo of gunfire from other training units created an atmosphere that felt almost sacred to Marcus. This was where soldiers were truly born. Drill Sergeant Harrison divided the recruits into groups of 5, assigning each group to a range instructor. Marcus found himself in a group with Johnson, Martinez, and 2 other recruits who had already established themselves as leaders within the unit. The range instructor, Sergeant Coleman, was a compact man with steady hands and the kind of calm demeanor that immediately inspired confidence. "All right, gentlemen," Sergeant Coleman began, holding up a standard-issue rifle. "This is the weapon you'll be training with for the next several weeks. Before any of you even thinks about loading ammunition, you'll learn every component of this rifle, how to maintain it, and how to handle it with the respect it deserves." The first hour was dedicated to weapon familiarization and safety protocols. Marcus listened intently, but much of the information was review from his years of studying with his grandfather. His hands moved with automatic precision as he field-stripped and reassembled his assigned rifle, completing the task while others were still struggling with the basic mechanisms. Sergeant Coleman noticed this immediately. "Thompson, step forward," he commanded, and Marcus felt his stomach drop, expecting another public humiliation. "Show the others how to properly clean the bolt assembly." For the first time since arriving at the facility, Marcus moved with confidence. His hands demonstrated the techniques with fluid expertise while he explained each step in clear, concise language. The other recruits watched with something that looked suspiciously like respect rather than mockery. "Outstanding," Sergeant Coleman said when Marcus had finished. "It's clear you've had extensive experience with firearms maintenance. Where did you learn these skills?" "My grandfather, sir," Marcus replied. "He was a veteran, and he taught me everything about weapons care and handling." "Well, your grandfather taught you well. Now let's see how that theoretical knowledge translates to practical application." The moment Marcus had been waiting for his entire life had finally arrived. As Sergeant Coleman distributed ammunition and explained the shooting positions, Marcus felt that familiar transformation beginning. The nervous, ridiculed boy from Millbrook was fading away, replaced by someone who belonged exactly where he was. The first exercise was basic marksmanship from a prone position at 50 meters. The recruits would fire 5 shots, and their accuracy would be scored on a standard military target. Johnson went first, managing to place 3 shots within the target area with 2 complete misses. Martinez performed slightly better with 4 hits, though none were particularly close to the center. When Marcus's turn came, he approached the firing line with steady steps. He settled into the prone position with natural grace, adjusted his rifle, and looked downrange toward his target. The familiar silence descended upon him like a comfortable blanket. His first shot struck the target dead center. "Good shot, Thompson," Sergeant Coleman called out, but Marcus was already aligning for his second shot. The bullet hole appeared less than an inch from the first. By the 4th shot, Sergeant Coleman had stopped calling out encouragement and was simply watching in amazement. The 5th shot created a grouping so tight that the holes overlapped, forming what appeared to be a single, slightly larger hole in the exact center of the target. The silence on the range was absolute. Even the recruits from other lanes had stopped their own exercises to stare at Marcus's target. Sergeant Coleman walked downrange to examine the results more closely, shaking his head in disbelief. In 20 years of range instruction, he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have never seen anything like this from a recruit. This is professional-level precision shooting. This is the kind of accuracy we expect from seasoned Royal Guard marksmen with years of experience." Johnson's expression had changed from condescending amusement to stunned recognition. Martinez whispered something to the recruit next to him, who responded with a low whistle of admiration. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Marcus heard his name spoken without mockery or pity. The exercises continued throughout the afternoon, with each new challenge revealing another aspect of Marcus's extraordinary abilities. Standing position shooting at 75 meters, kneeling position at 100 meters, rapid-fire drills, moving targets, every test confirmed what Sergeant Coleman had initially observed. Marcus wasn't just a good shot. He was a natural marksman of almost superhuman ability. Word of the afternoon's events spread through the facility like wildfire. By evening formation, even recruits from other units were stealing glances at the quiet boy who had somehow transformed from the unit's weakest link into its most valuable asset. Drill Sergeant Harrison, who had spent weeks making Marcus the target of his most withering commentary, approached him after the evening meal with an expression Marcus had never seen before: respect. "Thompson," Harrison said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been in this business for 15 years and I've learned to spot potential in young recruits. I thought I had you figured out from day one, but I was wrong." "Dead wrong." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you demonstrated today on that range wasn't just skill. It was a gift, the kind of natural ability that shows up maybe once in a decade, if we're lucky. I want you to know that from now on, you'll be training with our advanced marksmanship unit. You've earned a place among the best we have to offer." That night, as Marcus lay in his bunk, he could hear whispered conversations throughout the barracks. But the tone had changed completely. Instead of predictions about when he would wash out, his fellow recruits were speculating about what kind of assignments he might receive upon graduation. "Did you see those shots today?" he heard Martinez whisper to Johnson. "I mean, I've been shooting since I was 12 and I've never seen anything like that. It was like the rifle was part of him." "I heard Sergeant Coleman talking to Captain Reynolds about it," Johnson replied. "He said Thompson might be the most naturally gifted marksman they've ever seen come through this program." Marcus smiled in the darkness, his grandfather's compass warm in his palm. Old William had been right. Sometimes the world needed to see what you were really made of before it would take you seriously. But more importantly, Marcus had finally seen it himself. All those years of ridicule and doubt had served a purpose. They had taught him resilience, humility, and the kind of quiet determination that couldn't be broken by temporary setbacks or the opinions of others. The boy from Millbrook was gone. In his place lay a future Royal Guard marksman, ready to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly the ones the world needs most. 6 months after arriving at the Royal Guard training facility as the unit's most ridiculed recruit, Marcus Thompson stood among the top 5 candidates selected for the final qualification exercise. The transformation had been remarkable not just in his military skills, but in how others perceived him. Fellow recruits who had once whispered about his inevitable failure now sought his advice on shooting techniques and battlefield tactics. The final exercise was legendary among Royal Guard candidates, a comprehensive test designed to push each recruit to their absolute limits across multiple disciplines. Combat scenarios, strategic planning, leadership under pressure, and marksmanship challenges would all be evaluated over a grueling 72-hour period. Only those who excelled would earn the right to wear the distinctive uniform of the Royal Guard. Captain Reynolds addressed the 5 remaining candidates in his office, a room decorated with commendations and photographs from decades of distinguished service. The morning sunlight streaming through tall windows cast long shadows across his weathered face as he studied each young man who sat before him. "Gentlemen," Captain Reynolds began, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and expectation. You five represent the finest recruits to emerge from this training cycle. Each of you has demonstrated exceptional skills in your respective specialties. However, the Royal Guard requires more than individual excellence. We need soldiers who can adapt to any situation, support their teammates without hesitation, and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for those under our protection. He walked to a large window overlooking the training grounds where new recruits were struggling through their first week of basic conditioning. The exercise you're about to undertake is modeled after an actual mission that took place 3 years ago. A dignitary visiting a remote mountain facility came under attack by hostile forces. The Royal Guard unit assigned to protect him faced overwhelming odds, challenging terrain, and limited resources. Through exceptional teamwork, tactical brilliance, and individual heroism, they succeeded in their mission. Your task is to demonstrate that you can perform at that same level. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but it was excitement rather than fear. After months of proving himself on the shooting range and in tactical exercises, he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The doubt and humiliation of his early weeks felt like memories from another lifetime. The exercise began at dawn with a helicopter insertion into rugged mountain terrain. The candidates were divided into 2 teams and given conflicting intelligence reports about enemy positions and objectives. Marcus found himself team leader for the first scenario, a role that would have been unimaginable when he first arrived at the facility. His team consisted of Johnson, the former football player who had once predicted Marcus would wash out within a week, and Williams, a quiet recruit from the countryside who had emerged as one of the most tactically astute members of their class. The dynamic between the 3 men had evolved considerably over the months of training. "Thompson," Johnson said as they studied their mission briefings, "what's your read on this intelligence? Something feels off about the enemy position reports." Marcus examined the tactical maps with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. The positions they've indicated would leave the enemy exposed to crossfire from multiple directions. Either they're poorly trained, or this is deliberate misinformation designed to lead us into an ambush. Williams nodded in agreement. "So what's our play?" "We assume it's a trap," Marcus replied without hesitation. "We approach from the North Ridge, which gives us higher elevation and multiple escape routes if things go badly. Johnson, your close combat skills make you our point man. Williams, you handle communications and coordinate with the other team. I'll provide overwatch and eliminate any long-range threats." The plan proved prescient. As they moved through the simulated combat zone, Marcus spotted several enemy positions that weren't mentioned in their briefing. His ability to remain calm under pressure and make accurate assessments of tactical situations had developed alongside his legendary marksmanship skills. The first day's challenges included urban combat scenarios, hostage rescue simulations, and coordination exercises that tested their ability to work as a cohesive unit while maintaining individual effectiveness. Marcus excelled not just in the shooting portions, but in leadership decision-making and tactical analysis. During one particularly complex scenario, involving multiple hostile forces and civilian casualties, Marcus demonstrated the kind of split-second judgment that separated good soldiers from exceptional ones. When faced with a situation where he could either engage an enemy sniper or assist a wounded teammate, he chose a third option that nobody had considered. "Johnson, suppress the sniper position with covering fire," he called out, while simultaneously moving to assist the wounded Williams. "I'm going to use the reflection off my scope to blind him temporarily, then take the shot while his vision is compromised." The maneuver worked flawlessly, eliminating the threat while ensuring his teammates' safety. Observing instructors made notes on clipboards, their expressions revealing nothing, but Marcus caught Captain Reynolds nodding approvingly from his observation position. The second day brought mountain survival challenges and long-range precision shooting under adverse weather conditions. A sudden storm had moved in overnight, bringing high winds, driving rain, and visibility that dropped to less than 50 meters. The candidates were required to locate and eliminate multiple targets at distances up to 800 meters while navigating treacherous terrain. This was Marcus's element. While other candidates struggled with the environmental conditions, he seemed to thrive in the chaos. His ability to read wind patterns, adjust for atmospheric pressure changes, and maintain steady aim in challenging conditions was nothing short of extraordinary. During one critical shot sequence, he was required to eliminate a terrorist holding a hostage at 600 meters while positioned on an unstable rock formation in heavy crosswinds. The margin for error was less than 2 inches. A miscalculation could result in hitting the hostage instead of the target. Marcus settled into his shooting position, his grandfather's compass providing a familiar comfort in his pocket. He studied the wind patterns by watching the movement of grass and debris, calculated the trajectory adjustments in his head, and controlled his breathing until everything else faded away. The shot was perfect. Captain Reynolds later described it as one of the most technically difficult shots he had ever witnessed under training conditions. That level of precision under those environmental conditions is the hallmark of a truly exceptional marksman, he told the other instructors. We may be looking at the next generation of elite Royal Guard operators. The final day brought the ultimate test, a complex scenario that required the candidates to protect a mock VIP while under attack from multiple directions. The exercise would test every skill they had developed over their months of training, from close-quarters combat to strategic planning to precision shooting. Marcus and his team were assigned to provide security for a diplomat attending a peace conference in a simulated hostile environment. Intelligence reports indicated multiple threats, but the specific nature and timing of attacks remained unknown. They would have to adapt to whatever situations developed. The attack came without warning, during what appeared to be a routine security sweep. Multiple hostile forces launched a coordinated assault from 3 different directions, using tactics designed to overwhelm the security detail and create maximum confusion. In the chaos that followed, Marcus's transformation from ridiculed recruit to exceptional soldier became complete. He coordinated defensive positions, eliminated long-range threats with surgical precision, and made tactical decisions that kept his team and their protectee alive through wave after wave of simulated attacks. The defining moment came when a sniper positioned 700 meters away threatened to eliminate the diplomat with a clear shot through a narrow window. Marcus had approximately 3 seconds to locate the threat, calculate the shot, and eliminate the target before the mission failed catastrophically. Time seemed to slow as Marcus dropped into a shooting position, acquired the target through his scope, and fired a single shot that traveled across nearly half a mile to strike its target with absolute precision. The entire exercise ground fell silent for a moment before erupting in cheers from the observing instructors and support staff. When the final scores were announced that evening, Marcus Thompson stood at the top of the rankings with a performance that shattered several facility records. But more important than the numerical scores was the respect he had earned from everyone around him. Johnson approached him after the ceremony, extending his hand with genuine admiration. Marcus, I owe you more than an apology. When we started this program, I thought I knew what it meant to be a soldier. You taught me that real strength isn't about size or swagger. It's about never giving up on yourself, even when everyone else has. Captain Reynolds's final words to the graduating class were directed specifically at Marcus. Recruit Thompson, your journey through this program has been remarkable, not just for your exceptional skills, but for the character you've demonstrated. You arrived here as someone others underestimated, but you leave as someone they'll never forget. The Royal Guard is honored to count you among our ranks. As Marcus packed his belongings for the journey home before his first assignment, he found a letter waiting for him. It was from Sergeant Mills, the policeman from the Millbrook Summer Festival shooting booth. Dear Marcus, the letter read, Word has reached us here in Millbrook about your exceptional performance in Royal Guard training. I wanted you to know that those of us who witnessed your shooting that day at the festival always knew you had something special. The whole town is talking about your success, and we couldn't be more proud. You've shown everyone that sometimes the quiet ones surprise you the most. Congratulations, and thank you for your service. That night, Marcus called his parents from the facility phone. His mother cried with joy and pride, while his father struggled to find words adequate to express his amazement at how wrong everyone had been about his son's potential. "We always knew you were special," his mother said through her tears, "but even we had no idea just how special." As Marcus prepared to begin his career as a Royal Guard marksman, he reflected on the long journey from ridicule to respect. Every insult, every moment of doubt, every prediction of failure had served a purpose. They had forged him into someone who could face any challenge with quiet confidence and unshakable determination. The boy from Millbrook, who had been laughed at for his dreams, had become a man whose skills would protect lives and serve his country with distinction. And somewhere in heaven, he was certain his grandfather was smiling with pride at the soldier his grandson had become.